Avengers Endgame. Every question that needs answering. Avengers Endgame has come and gone, and it was nothing short of fantastic. Fans everywhere are raving about this epic conclusion to the Infinity War storyline that Marvel Studios has been building towards for over a decade now. While the general response to the movie is positive, it's still far from perfect. Not to be a downer, but there are a lot of questionable moments in the film. As entertaining as it was, it also kind of made no sense. Before we move on though, you should be warned that this video will feature some serious Endgame spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, turn back now. Also, before you go ahead and try to use the "it's a comic book movie, stop taking things so seriously" logic on us, just know that we're aware. We're choosing to be difficult about this. Some of us hold these movies up to high standards. Amazing movies means high expectations, and with high expectations, it better make sense. So here's every question that needs answering after Endgame. How did Captain America return all of the Infinity Stones? This one felt obvious even as it was happening. As the movie begins wrapping up, Captain America takes it upon himself to go put all of the Infinity Stones back where they came from. We don't actually see him do this, but it's just implied that he'll take care of it. First of all, that's an incredibly difficult challenge. Acquiring them all took the entire Avengers team to do, and took THANOS about 21 movies. To just casually volunteer to go put them all back seems like a bit of an undersell. The real question though is, how did he do it? I mean, for starters, the Aether exists as a goo-like substance inside of Jane Foster. We know that Rocket Raccoon retrieved it, but how in the world did Cap put that back? That sounds uncomfortable for Jane. Also, how did he return the Soul Stone? Did he just go back to Vormir and hand it over to Red Skull? Give him a quick, "Hey, what's up, how you been?" and then leave? If that's the case, then by that logic, shouldn't Black Widow be resurrected? Since it's a soul for a soul and he's returning the stone, he should get the person back, no? The whole premise of putting the stones back where they belong made little to no sense. How did Old Man Cap have his shield? While we're on the very same scene, there's another glaring issue. We know that Steve Rogers, after successfully putting back all of the Infinity Stones, went back to the 1940s to live a full life with the love of his life, Peggy. Well, that's all fine and good, but if that's the case, how is he just hanging out right there as an old man? If he really went back to a different timeline, then that should exist on a totally different plane and not in the same main timeline. It goes against the rules of time travel that Bruce Banner explains earlier in the movie. Going back and doing things differently isn't supposed to change the future. It simply creates another timeline that's different. So it's inexcusable how Captain America is sitting there, unless he's traveled through dimensions at the exact moment to meet the gang there. While we're on the subject, how does he possibly have his shield? The original one was scratched to bits by Black Panther, and his replacement got destroyed by THANOS. If Steve Rogers went back in time to spend his life with Peggy instead of fight crime, then there should be no such shield to give to Falcon. I understand the important symbolism of passing on the notable weapon and the significance of the moment, but there's no conceivable way that makes sense. Even if he goes to another timeline to take it away from another Captain America, that means that there's an active Captain America out there trying to operate without his shield. How did they make more Ant-Man suits? If you'll recall in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Hank Pym is furious at Scott Lang for quote-unquote destroying the one and only Ant-Man suit. Little does he know that Scott just hid the thing for safekeeping. When he thought the suit was destroyed though, that was his life's work gone up in smoke. He made it very clear that that was a one-of-a-kind suit and it would be impossible to recreate. They make a big deal out of it and everything. Then Endgame comes, and within moments, literally everyone on the team has an Ant-Man suit, able to shrink down and enter the quantum realm. Seriously? The entire plot of the last Ant-Man movie was about how this is the only suit of its kind and could never be recreated. Then, without as much as breaking a sweat, the Avengers are able to recreate a whole closet full of them. Something doesn't add up. How did Thanos time travel? While we're talking about the Ant-Man suit, how did Thanos manage to travel through the quantum realm? We've established that the Ant-Man suit is the only technology that can successfully enter the Forbidden Zone. Now let's just say that we let it slide that all of the Avengers suddenly have a suit of their very own. But how does Thanos and his whole army manage to do it without one? While it's true that he is a mighty galactic titan and has some powers that regular humans don't have, it's never established how or why he can just casually time travel. Perhaps he invented his own tech, but that's never specified either. During the film, we see Nebula kneel before Thanos and offer him a vial of the Pym particles. But how does he use those bad boys? They made a huge deal about the fact that the Avengers only had enough particles for one round trip. And 2014 Nebula arrived in the future with the Avengers, so that means she used hers. Thanos would have needed a bunch more to shrink his entire spaceship and make the trip through the quantum realm through the Avengers portal. Where did it all come from? How many different timelines were created? The manner in which the Avengers utilize time travel is a bit vague, to say the least. At different parts, it's suggested that the heroes can change the past, and also can't change the past. There's the timeline where Cap goes back to spend his life with Peggy. There's also the timeline where Loki escapes with the Tesseract, meaning Cap never returned them all to their rightful place. Plus, there's a timeline from the 70s where Tony has a chat with his father. Since the events of the past were altered, that means they created yet another timeline. There's also the Thanos contradiction, where he comes from 2014 and is taken out in the future. But Nebula kills her past self and nothing happens to her future self. This would suggest that Tony's snap only decimated one Thanos out of the many possible ones. The waters are murky here, folks. Speaking of which, how could Nebula kill herself and still be alive? 2014 Thanos gets defeated in the future and is done for good, but future Nebula eliminates past Nebula and remains totally fine? How in the world does that make sense? In order to help the Avengers, 2023 Nebula tries convincing 2014 Nebula to get on board with their plans and leave Thanos' side. She struggles, but ultimately refuses. So 2023 Nebula is forced to eliminate her. According to the movie's logic, that should have erased the 2023 version of her as well. But it doesn't. Apparently, that's not how time travel works in this movie. Instead of the past affecting the future, it simply splits into different timelines with different realities. Well, by that logic, Thanos might not really have been defeated, because they only chopped the head off of the 2014 Thanos. Man, I could really use an aspirin right now. Where did Loki go? While we're talking about alternate timelines, can we talk about Loki for a second? In the original MCU timeline, after the Battle of New York, Thor takes Loki and the Tesseract back to Asgard. However, when the gang goes back to the Battle of New York in Avengers Endgame, Loki manages to escape with the Tesseract. So does this mean that there's now an alternate timeline where Loki gets away in 2012? Wouldn't that mean that Thor: The Dark World never happens? Sure, some fans might be happy about that, but it throws off the entire timeline of the storyline. If you'll recall, Loki was defeated by Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, who then promised no resurrections. So it would seem like that version of Loki is gone for good. However, there's a different god of mischief on the loose now, with the Space Stone. Perhaps this is the new plot of the new Loki-oriented Disney Plus show set to be released. Why was old Hulk acting like new Hulk? Since Endgame toyed with a number of different points in time, it only makes sense that we see multiple versions of the same character. After all, people change over time, and this is typically represented in the movies. Just look at Nebula, for example. She traveled back in time to confront her past self, who was still loyal to Thanos. In that example, we can see one character with two very different moral compasses. However, the movie completely disregards this rule when it comes to the Hulk. In 2012's Avengers, he was simply a rage-fueled brute. Over the years, Bruce Banner has gotten more and more comfortable with his alter ego, learning how to control it as best he can. That's a recent phenomenon though. By Endgame, he's able to fully merge the two personas and become Professor Hulk. In Thor Ragnarok, he's even got a bit of personality, and he can talk. However, anything prior to that, he's 100% just a grunting chaos machine. That's what makes the Hulk's behavior in Endgame so strange. We see the aftermath of the Battle of New York against Loki, where the rest of the Avengers force the giant green guy to take the stairs instead of the elevator with them. He loudly complains and reluctantly takes the stairs. 2012 Hulk did not have that sort of personality or control over his emotions. It's totally inconsistent with the character. Did anyone who got snapped age at all? In Avengers Endgame, the Hulk manages to successfully utilize the Infinity Gauntlet to bring back to life all of the humanity that was lost 5 years prior in the snap. The tricky part here is that 5 years were supposed to have passed. Did nobody age when they returned to life? So is a half of all life in the universe just 5 years older than the other half now? That 5-year gap would likely wreak havoc on families, schools, businesses, politics, and pretty much every aspect of ordinary life. This issue is glaringly obvious when we see Peter Parker's pal Ned returning back to school. In Spider-Man Homecoming, Ned was a sophomore in high school. At the end of Endgame, it appears as though he's still in the same grade, but that's 5 years later. How does that work? Here's hoping that they explain this phenomenon in Spider-Man Far From Home. How did Captain Marvel know about the fight against Thanos? In one of the most epic scenes of the movie, during the climactic battle against Thanos and his army, Captain Marvel shows up to seemingly save the day. She takes out Thanos' ship and then battles him one-on-one. If you really think about it though, how did this happen? The resurrected heroes, the army of Wakanda, and their assorted allies all show up for battle thanks to Doctor Strange and his magic portals. This much makes sense because we know that Strange was with all of the ex-departed, and he's able to transport people in such fashion. However, Carol Danvers shows up on her own. She just arrives, unannounced, without warning. And it's never really explained how or even why. We know she's there for the fight, but how did she know when to show up? Or where to go? Or how did she even know that Thanos was attacking Earth? She's never even met Doctor Strange before, so it's not like he could have teleported her there with the others or gotten word out to her. Maybe she was just passing through the neighborhood coincidentally. Is there still an Avengers team now? There are certainly enough superheroes remaining to make a new Avengers team, but anyone who's ever played team sports knows that individuals don't make the team. The core players of the original roster are now gone, so the future of the Avengers seems up in the air. Captain America was the clear-cut leader of the group, with Iron Man acting as its franchise player, and Black Widow acting as the glue to hold the whole thing together. With the three of them gone, and Thor now riding around outer space with the Guardians of the Galaxy, who's left on the Avengers? We know that Falcon will take over the role of Captain America. We also have the likes of Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Black Panther, Hawkeye, Professor Hulk, and Captain Marvel to consider. There's definitely enough players to make a roster, but it'll be fascinating to see how the Avengers ensemble looks moving forward, if there even is one. What was that sound at the end? Finally, a question we've got an answer for. Moviegoers were shocked when Avengers Endgame didn't feature any sort of post-credit scene. After 21 movies, that extra little taste had become expected from these movies. Endgame offered no such dessert, but it did offer a weird, cryptic moment. Rather than any sort of foreshadowing scene, we simply heard the sound of a hammer hitting metal. In fact, it sounded somewhat familiar. That sound was actually of Tony Stark building the Mark I in the cave of the first Iron Man movie. Symbolically, it's the sound of Tony Stark building the MCU, which is a fitting send-off to the franchise's first hero. We could probably keep going for a while, but let's end things here. After all, the movie was an instant classic, and it would be rude to nitpick it any more than necessary. What were some parts that didn't make sense to you? Were there any other glaring issues that we may have missed? Let us know in the comments down below. And before you go, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on all the latest releases. Until next time, you've been watching The Binger. Thanks for watching.